Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. This roundtable discussion of Bill number 355-33 is hereby convened, and the roundtable will focus primarily on the proposed legislation and the content contained in that particular proposal. This is Bill 355-33 relative to the creation of a Bill of Rights for renewable energy consumers. And I'd like to, before I proceed, thank my colleague Senator Tony Ada for joining me this afternoon in this particular roundtable discussion. In compliance with the open government law, the committee did forward a notification to the public on the 3rd of October. That was a primary notification to our community, with a subsequent second notification sent out to all the stakeholders and to the public on Thursday, October 6th. I would like to, as chair, extend my personal appreciation to our media partners who have consistently assisted the committee in regards to ensuring that any piece of legislation or activity that is conducted by the committee is shared appropriately with the public. So I want to thank our media partners for their assistance. We do have several individuals who have signed up to discuss this particular piece of legislation, and if they're not already at the table, which I see they are, I would like to invite them up. First of all, we have Mr. Scott Hagan, Mr. William Hagan, Jeff Ocolo, Laura Lee Crisostomo, and Imao Lynn Scott. Folks, just for your information, the format of this afternoon's roundtable discussion is we will entertain the piece of legislation section by section or sub-item by sub-item, just so that in fact it would be a discussion specifically with those particular provisions. Please, we do have industry representatives, we do have government representatives at the table, and of course we have my colleague who's also here. I would like to ask that if there's any concern or any issues or any proposed amendment that you would like the committee or the sponsor of this legislation to consider, then I welcome it at this particular format. So if I can just go around the table and ask everyone to please introduce themselves, ensure your mic is turned on, and then we can proceed with the deliberation.
Bill Hagan, Pacific Solar and Photovoltaics.
Thank you, Bill, and welcome.
Scott Hagan, Pacific Solar.
Thank you, Scott.
Laura Lee Crisostomo, Guam Energy Office.
Thank you, Laura Lee, for joining us this afternoon.
Jeff Ficolo, Micronesia Renewable Energy.
Thank you, Jeff.
Lynn Scott, Green Energy Solutions, Inc.
Thank you, Lynn. It's okay if I refer to you as Lynn or Mr. Scott? Okay. Thank you, Lynn. And like I said, I really appreciate industry representatives participating in this discussion, inclusive of representatives of the government of Guam. So we will proceed, like I shared with you a little earlier, in really a more direct format. And if there's any questions, any comments, or any suggestions for amended language, please share it with us. Also, for the information of everyone here who does not have a copy of the piece of legislation, we will also be presenting it on the screen so you can follow along with us as we proceed with the discussion. On Bill 355-33, first section is Article 9, Renewable Energy Consumer Bill of Rights, subsection 32901, sub-item A, which is the legislative intent. Any questions or comments or recommendations for reconsideration of this particular provision? Thank you. Any questions or comments with regards to the sub-item A?
Chairman?
Yes, William.
My comments are rather general in nature and not specific by item, if I may. And we applaud your concern for renewable energy customers and consumers. Your proposed legislation certainly shows your intent at consumer protection, but much of what you are trying to accomplish already exists in various national and local building and electrical codes. Also, as pointed out previously by Mr. Scott, there are certain items which need to be reviewed. A true consumer protection would be to include a section on the amount being charged customers of lease and/or power purchase agreements of renewable energy agreements. A renewable energy customer should never be required to pay more than currently utility rates at any time during the life of the agreement. There are currently on island certain predatory salespeople selling renewable energy agreements who know nothing about their product. They focus on getting an agreement signed, promising zero down or free, or you can always cancel later. And even, you need to buy power somewhere, why not clean solar energy? Poor consumers are often never aware that in a few years, their renewable energy costs will exceed what the utility is currently charging. Our company has power purchase agreements with a number of customers, and when the price of oil started to drop 2 years ago, we sent letters to all of our PPA customers. An escalation is normal in most PPAs to cover the cost of rising insurance costs, maintenance, and other expenses. But we advised our customers that we would never charge more than current utility rates for renewable energy being sold to them. As a local company committed to Guam and its people, it is the only fair thing to do. After all, we as the owners of the system get the tax credits, the depreciation on our systems, as well as revenue from the sale of power. There's no need to take unfair advantage of our customers. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Hagan. I certainly appreciate your perspective in regards to the proposed legislation. If you take a look at this particular proposal and you combine it with the Consumer Protection Act, I believe that they're complementary in nature. There's perhaps a need for a little bit of tweaking as it applies to renewable energy. And to me, the underlying concern is not whether there are predatory activities out there at this point in time. It's in anticipation of a growing industry and ensuring that the consumers have that mechanism of protection. And that is ensuring that they know and understand and they're properly educated and informed of the item or the product that they are purchasing. And we all know that these are, in many cases, at this today's rates and prices, that they are major investments on the part of any residential owner or any business enterprise out there, and it's just ensuring that these consumers have the right to know and that they understand exactly what is being sold to them. So I certainly hope that upon the conclusion of our conversation that we will see a much more refined product before us that would take care and address the concerns of myself as the primary sponsor of ensuring that our consumers have that right to know and they're properly informed, and that certainly it can be used as a mechanism, which I hope will never have to come to that, but it can be used as a mechanism so that in fact our consumers have an avenue to be able to ensure that they can go back to the primary business that sold them that product if it's not meeting the standards that were provided at the inception. So I certainly hope that everyone's on the same page in regards to that. I know, Lynn, that you have provided some comments, and I'd like to go section by section, please, and then if you have any closing comments or any general comments towards the end, I'd like to entertain that at that time. So if there's no questions on sub-item A, sub-item B, and perhaps for the information of the public, I'll go ahead and read it. It lists that Guam believes that every renewable energy consumer has rights and should be made aware of these rights prior to the installation of their system. It lists that Guam intends to make it clear that it does not want to interfere with the ability of the Public Utilities Commission to regulate and set rates for the public utilities, but it lists that Guam also intends to make it abundantly clear that no renewable energy seller or installer shall submit a proposal for a renewable energy system without first giving the customer more than ample opportunity to exercise their fundamental rights as renewable energy consumers. Those fundamental rights as renewable energy consumers shall include, and then for the information of the public who are watching, enumerates 11 rights. The first one would read, the right of all factual information that the consumer will need to make a well-informed decision when purchasing, leasing, or signing up for solar energy lease, power purchase agreements, and direct purchase arrangements provided by the seller or installer. So on sub-item 1, any questions, comments, or recommendations for amendments? Yes, please, Scott.
I guess it's line 3.
Okay.
I have an issue with that we can't even give a proposal. We can't even, you're asking me for a proposal. I can't even give that to you unless I run down through all of this.
Can you refer to the exact verbiage?
It says no renewable energy seller or installer shall submit a proposal for renewable energy system without first giving the customer more than ample opportunity to exercise their fundamental rights. So, I don't know, is there another way to reword that? because it stops me from even being able to give you a proposal.
Okay.
I can't even give you a price quote, even if you asked me for one. I couldn't even give you one over the phone, unless I go through all of this first.
Okay. As a matter of fact, what we'll do is we'll seek legal guidance in regards to that. I understand your concern is making sure that any information or any document that's presented to a potential customer or consumer, that it does not prohibit you as a seller to be able to provide that information. So I
Yeah, it
understand.
almost stops me from even engaging in some of the conversation.
So do you have a recommended language, or does anyone or installer shall submit?
Maybe it has something more along the lines, instead of a proposal, but enter into an agreement.
Okay.
Because at this stage, I can't even give you a proposal.
Okay. It's an excellent point, and I appreciate that, Scott. Yeah. Okay.
Prior to entering into an agreement.
Okay. So noted. That verbiage, I will work with legal counsel and see how that can be clarified, because the intent is, like I said, to be able to provide a proposal, and then ensuring that consumer is knowledgeable of the product that's being sold, and then, the product can be sold to them. So that's the intent behind it. So I appreciate you, Scott. Thank you for bringing that to the attention of myself. Any other questions or comments with regards to sub-item 1? If not, we'll proceed to sub-item 2. The right that the renewable energy system being offered by the seller or installer meets all of the standards of that particular type of technology, being wind, solar energy, or solar thermal systems adopted by the federal and local jurisdictions, and that all materials being used have the industry standard certification listed as approved products by the Underwriters Laboratory Association. I do know that during the course of the public hearing there was a concern, and even prior to that there was a written document that was forwarded to myself and the chair, that perhaps some of this verbiage has to be amended so that it truly reflects U.S. certified products rather than a specific certification. So any comments from anyone on the floor? Please, Lynn.
Actually, Chairman, before we, and I don't know why I missed this earlier, but I'm going to take a quick step back for just a second.
Okay.
I think under subsection 1, we should identify the differences between the types of agreements there, and
Okay.
what information must be supplied under each of the agreements, as these are all very different products: an outright purchase, a lease, and a power purchase agreement. Okay? When we lump it all together, saying that they have the right to all the factual data, well, what is that factual data and who determines it? Me, as a solar provider, can I just make up whatever I want and call that factual data? Can a power purchase provider or a lease company decide what that is? Who's going to decide what that information is and what the requirement is? Right? In regards to my previous line of work, okay, there's a very specific list of documents that are required under the financial, anytime you're financing anything through TILA or through the federal government and financing, and that should be listed here as well. Okay? So we need to make that determination clear. If we're going to have that phrase within the Bill of Rights, we need to say, A, the price of the system is this, right? The financing is this is what the interest rate is for each of these type of property, type of agreements, okay? So somewhere we need to determine that list of documents.
Okay. Did you want to recommend that in fact those particular sub-items be highlighted? Let's say, for example, the cost, the terms and conditions under sub-item 1.
Those are in banking regulation
Yes.
already. So maybe the specific isn't here, but we need to reference that they need to follow banking regulation for all types of these agreements. As a power purchase agreement is just a way to finance a system, okay? Number 2, so is a lease. It's no different than leasing a car. You're required to get specific documents, okay? And same thing here, okay? These documents need to be provided, okay? And so for verbiage-wise, there need to be something that correlates somewhere within the banking and financial regulation where this would apply.
So the language should be a bit more expansive in terms of specifics, because let's say, for example, power purchase agreement, if in fact that arrangement is with a financial institution, then the financial institution is already obligated to provide their financial terms. What it would be require, and the intent here is ensuring the consumer understands the nature of what the product is
Well,
and the
let me
capacity.
give you a quick example on a power purchase agreement, okay? Basic power purchase agreement is the provider builds a system for you.
Lynn, if I can interrupt you just for a second. Mr. Duenas, Chairman of CCU, if you want to like to join us? Okay.
Now,
Thank you, Lynn.
This is just an overview and not very specific, okay? But in theory, a power purchase agreement is a system provider builds a system and then sells power to somebody, whether it be a homeowner, a commercial, or back to a utility, okay? At a specific predetermined rate that's agreeable within the contract, okay? So, in there, and further down, and we'll address this more later, typically there aren't down payment requirements or sitting down and transferring rebates from the federal government without at least disclosing a price. Where power purchase providers aren't disclosing the price of the system that they built, we would need to have at least that part. As we look at a consumer comparing to buy, okay, I'm going to go buy a BMW at $62,000. I'm going to go buy an Infiniti at $50,000. I'm going to go buy a Toyota pickup truck. It's X. How they finance it, right, is completely different.
Correct.
Okay? So, I'm going to do a PPA, or I'm going to do a lease, or I'm going to pay cash. Okay? So, in each of these areas, they're so very different, there needs to be at least a cost, a system cost, associated with what they're doing, and then how they're going to choose to finance it. And under the financing side, some language that refers them back to banking regulations that says you're required to provide these financial disclosures showing what the consumer is actually paying over the life of the system, both in cost and in interest. And that's required by federal law.
But let me ask you, in regards to the banking component, let's say, for example, I want to go procure some solar energy panels. I go to a banking, secure the financing. To me, the obligation, and I'm a layman, please, so layperson, so please add to the conversation if by any chance I may be veering in the, I need clarification. But if I want to purchase an item, secure the $20,000, $30,000 loan from a financial institution, whatever the terms of that financing, because it's offered by the financial institution, it's really the obligation of the financial institution to provide that. What I would, as a consumer, want to receive in terms of education and understanding of the product that is being sold is the capacity of the product, the specifics in terms of the benefit that ultimately will be rendered to myself as a consumer, what warranties exist, if any, and whatever other information the seller of that product feels that is necessary that the consumer knows before the purchase. Not necessarily the banking information that I already would get that information from the bank, because that's a third-party participant in regards to this entire arrangement. It would be myself, the solar company that's selling me the panels, and then the banking industry. But even with the bank, unless it's guaranteed, even with the bank doesn't deal with the seller. It is the bank, the consumer, myself, and then I work with the seller of the product. Does that make any sense?
Sometimes yes,
Yeah.
and sometimes no.
Please.
Okay? Depending on the financing, whether it's a construction type financing, and if it is, a lot of times the bank does communicate directly with the provider of the system, or if you're building a house, your contractor and those kinds of things. The bank also has inspections and those kinds of things.
Right.
So there is that third party, okay? But let's come back to the beginning, okay? The specifications of what the system will do is the same, is not the same as the financing terms and conditions. And that documents that you say that the bank will automatically give, well, that's actually determined by the federal government.
Correct.
They say you have to supply this, okay? Well, in this case, most, if not all, except for maybe me because of my years in banking, okay, are not familiar with the requirements that they have to meet in regards to financing disclosures that they should be providing to the consumer, okay? So, if we're talking about a Bill of Rights, we need to say that, hey, these type of agreements are also required to follow this disclosure requirement, right? They need to know that if you don't know it now, you better go learn it before you offer this, because it is required, okay? And that's my point on part one, right? Is, look, let the consumer know that these companies are obligated to give them this information. If they
Okay.
don't know, right, this is a way that we can tell them. It's also a way we can tell industry individuals, industry companies, that, hey, you're required to do this as well. Because a lot of them don't know, okay? This is one way we can protect the consumer, by telling both sides, this is responsible, this is not,
Okay.
okay? When it
Okay,
comes
so-
to
so-
products and stuff like that, we get further into that in number
Right.
2, right? And in number 2, which I do want to also address.
Can we close out on sub-item 1 first? Any other comments or questions? And Lynn, just so that I understand, your recommendation is because all of these 3 or 4 different options, 1 to 3 options that may be available to the consumer, really there has to be specifics. The cost, the specifications of the product, any financial terms, if in fact the business that's selling the renewable product is directly involved.
Absolutely.
Okay.
And most importantly is the cost, because right now so much of it is based on the cost, right?
Yes.
Federal rebates are based on the cost, right? And whether they're buying it outright, okay, it's the price of the system that determines the 30% rebate by the federal
Okay.
government, which is subsequently paid by Aguon,
Okay.
right? It's not actually paid by the feds, okay? So there has to be that initial price disclosure to allow them to shop. If they go to company A and they can buy XYZ system for 30 grand, and they can go to company B and buy it for 29,000, but they go to company C, which is a power purchase agreement, and there's no cost, how do they know which way they want to go?
Okay.
Do I want to do a PPA? Do I want to do a lease? Or do I want to buy? How can they tell if there's no cost?
Thank you, Lynn. Bill, you have your hands raised? On sub-item 1.
Just a comment on the PPA. We've done a number of them. The consumer really needs to know one thing. What's the cost per kilowatt hour today and into the future? As long as I'm producing the power, I have liability insurance in place, I protect the building, I protect the customer. The big question is, what's it going to cost me every year for the next number of years per kilowatt hour? How I produce it, what kind of panel I use, what my inverter is, or what it even costs me should be irrelevant. It's the cost per kilowatt hour that people are looking at.
The cost is absolutely a major factor in regards to providing information, but also the specifications of the product. And it goes back to some of our conversations during the course of the public hearing, and also just a minute ago, is that really the consumers also need to understand what the product is. Now, if the seller is guaranteeing that particular product for the life of, let's say, 20 years, then as long as at the inception, the consumer understands exactly what that arrangement is. So if the seller is going to replace it, it's subject to replacing it, it's under warranty for 20 years, it's subject to be replaced. Should a storm come in, it's still warranted and it will be completely replaced if in fact it's damaged. I mean, that's the kind of information that the consumer at the initial purchasing really should be aware of based on the terms of the agreement, if it's a PPA. So that's where I'm looking at just ensuring that the consumers know and understand the product that is being purchased, the arrangement that is being provided, and the specifics. If the consumer receives all that information and still signs on the dotted line and purchases that item, he or she was well informed at the initial purchase that this is the product you're getting. Because in 2 years down the road, let's say a 5-year warranty was provided. 2 years down the road, the item breaks down, and that individual, the consumer, goes back to the initial seller, and for whatever reason, that warranty is not carried out, then the consumer has a right to further the process. Does that make sense?
That's true if the consumer is purchasing it.
Correct.
If all they're purchasing from me is power per kilowatt hour, and I guarantee it to them, and I guarantee the price for the next 20 years, How I get it to them should be irrelevant.
Okay, then it would be the terms of that agreement, yes. The specifics of the terms of that particular agreement.
The
How
equipment-
you provide it and at what cost reduction, as long as you lay that out of the term of the agreement, then that's the information the consumer should be aware of.
They don't need to know what kind of inverters or panels I'm using, as long as I guarantee to replace after a storm, to repair, to
And the
keep
cost
in
of the
place,
kilowatt hour
and
per
to continue to produce the power and to sell it to them at a given rate for the
Yeah.
term of the contract.
Okay, thank you, Bill. Yes, Jeff?
No, I appreciate that. Thank you. I agree with Bill.
Jeff, I'm sorry.
Sorry about that.
I agree with Bill on the power purchase agreement. Well, it might be an easier way to go in here, since Mr. Scott brought up the point too about certain dynamics, if you will, that should be in the power purchase agreement. Maybe reference the Department of Energy. Any really good power purchase agreement, I mean, you can go on a Department of Energy site and follow that, their structure, which that's what our power purchase agreement is based on, basically. And most of the bigger companies out there, Solar City, Sunrun, Sonova, I can go on and on and on. They base their power purchase agreements off of that Department of Energy power purchase agreement. So it's a very basic agreement, and that definitely is structured, based on the consumers. So that's a very good document to reference.
So would you recommend that we insert that particular language into?
Yeah, that just might satisfy everybody
Yeah,
on
okay.
that particular item.
Okay.
And it's a document, the Department of Energy, it's, of
Has
course,
endorsed it.
yeah, very
Okay,
respected.
thank you, Jeff. Any other comments on sub-item 1? Yes, Lynn?
I'm going to disagree with both Bill and Jeff, simply because you have such a large amount of a rebate that the consumer is giving up to the PPA provider. How do they know what they're giving up if no cost is disclosed? Okay? You're asking them to transfer sometimes in excess of $100,000 on commercial properties, okay? And you're not going to disclose how that number was come up with, or where it's going, or who's getting it. And then if you sit down and say, well, wait a minute, okay, I don't need to disclose anything because I'm providing power at a certain rate, then you need to look back and see who really owns the system, and is there even a rebate to be had, okay? And then you got to go even further and say, well, look, if the GPA customer does not own the system, they do not have the right to sign an interconnection agreement with GPA. That's Guam's net metering law. It says GPA customers can sell power back. But if they don't own the system, they don't have the right to sell anything back. So now by sitting down and saying this, look, there's a lot of issues that have to be brought to the forefront here in A, who owns ownership, who is entitled to the rebate, and 3, how much is that rebate?
Thank you, Lynn. Appreciate it. Yes, Jeff?
Senator, on the rebate, and our company doesn't just do power purchase agreements, we do direct purchases. The rebate really all comes down to is tax appetite. There's a lot of consumers that we run across, and we actually disclose that amount. And I don't mind if it's actually placed in this document at all, but we actually disclose that. A lot of our customers, if they do not have that tax appetite, to take that 30% offset, because there are no other rebates but the 30%, then, we try to steer them into a power purchase agreement that makes more sense. Also, what Mr. Scott said, third-party ownership is allowed on Guam. That's why there is power purchase agreements on Guam.
Thank you very much, Jeff. Okay, moving forward to yes, Joey, Mr. Duenas?
Hearing the discussion, and I'm sorry I'm late. My name is Joey Duenas. I have to agree with Lynn because part of the problem is, and you can go to a car example. You can get a car for many different ways. You can buy it for cash, as he stated. You can finance the car with a bank, or you can also lease the car. But you have to know what your basis is, because at some point it's like anything else. You're leasing, what part of that lease agreement, that lease payment is a repayment on the capital? What part of that is interest? Because interest can be imputed into you. So, I mean, this is really something I agree with Lynn. It should go through the banking board. I don't know the exact mechanics. I want to leave that up to the professionals at the banking board, the banking commissioner. I have that job once upon a time, but I'd like to leave that up to them because it's not for me to go in there and write that for them, but I'd like to see them come up with something. Let's say somebody signs a power purchase agreement, and after 5 years, he sells the house. The value of that power purchase, the value of those solar panels, or the value of having that, does he claim that on his tax? Is he going to say, well, guess what? There's a value there, and I'm going to use that for my basis on the house. My house, I bought the house for $300,000. The value of those solar panels is X, so my basis is $300,000 plus X, and that's what I want to deduct from the sale price. Because the guy coming in is going to be interested in saying, hey, I want to keep the solar panels. So, that's why there are some things, there are some nuances in there. And they have tax applications and tax consequences. And that's why I agree with Len. I think the banking board should go through this and really look at it because it has implications for the person's tax. Even if he's not claiming the rebate, but it's still, it's on his house, right? And what does he do? If he sells it in 5 years, do they just agree to take it all off? I don't think so.
I can answer that.
Okay, go ahead.
Okay.
You just take it all off.
Well, this
Jeff?
is for PPA.
Oh, power purchase agreement.
On a power purchase agreement, if somebody wants to sell the house, there's agreements, and it states right in a power purchase agreement that PPA is transferable to the new owner. Or they can elect to, if the new owner wants to, they can elect to just buy out the power purchase agreement price. So you definitely have an option on that.
But what if the new owner doesn't want it?
Then they can buy it out. They can.
Why should they buy it out? See,
Well, then don't purchase the house then. It's like saying I have a house with a swimming pool.
No, wait.
But I don't want the swimming pool.
Even if we use that as a scenario, then the
but-
original owner that's thinking about selling the property, that's where the obligation
And
is. So-
Senator, that's where that comes in. There's some value there, and they have to know, because as Jeff just said, he tells the owner, well, then you don't want to continue the purchase agreement, buy me out. Well, what is he buying you out? He doesn't know. There's no documentation.
He does know because
That's where the cost
that's where the
component.
cost component
and
comes
some
in.
of the financial details that will
Details.
be inserted into that agreement has to be provided. That information has to
Yes.
be provided to the buyer.
and it's actually in the power purchase agreement. And we actually went to adjusters here in Guam. They will give you $1 for dollar on what that solar system is worth. So that actually increases the value of your house at the sale of your house if you did not want to transfer that over.
Okay, but
So
it's excellent discussion in regards to, okay, if in fact this scenario takes place, who would take ownership, who would be responsible, and that would be, language will be inserted in here so that in fact there's that open disclosure at the inception.
Yeah. And if you follow the DOE power purchase agreement, that's all in there. So that eliminates so much language that you don't have to keep on placed into the bill if you just go back and reference that document.
Okay,
Yeah.
thank you, Jeff.
Well, that's...
Yes, Lynn?
Now we're sitting down actually having a discussion about long-term contracts either being able to help or to hinder the sale of a property. Okay? Is this really the protection that we want to provide in this bill? Right? Do we want to sit down and say that it's okay to have these things out there for 25 years, okay? And just because it's there, you now have limited your buyer pool when you want to sell your house. Okay? There are some people that they don't want solar, they don't want to pay, whatever the PPA agreement is. They don't want to deal with it. They don't want to worry about batteries sitting in their garage, and they don't want to worry about calling somebody up and going, hey, all of a sudden I don't have power. They don't want to deal with it. They're just fine with GPA, and they'll always be fine with GPA. Okay? But now those individuals are not going to buy my house because I got a 25-year PPA on it. Where's the consumer who signed up for the PPAs right there? And then who actually determines the buyout clause, and is it reasonable? These systems do depreciate, okay? They actually deteriorate over time as everything else does, okay? And yes, the appraisers have a formula to use. PEPRIA has set regulations for it, for future value, for refinancing and stuff like that. But what if the bank that they want to use, they won't finance the house because there's a long-term PPA on it, or there's a lien on the house, okay, because there's a long-term PPA on it, okay? These are other things that'll come later on in this bill, but they came early in the discussion. So to sit down and say, on a customer's bill of rights, okay, don't we want to say to them, we're here to protect you, and not to sit down and say, oh, we're going to reference certain material that somebody did in the States, okay, and it applies here. No, it doesn't apply here, okay? We can reference anything we want, but here we have the opportunity to sit down and say, okay, we can take a little piece of this, a little piece of this, a little piece of this, and write what works for our citizens here on Guam.
Right.
Okay? Not just dump it into, oh, this is a standard document from DOE, or this is a standard document so-and-so. Let's write what's important to the Guamanians.
Please, folks, as we transition upon the conclusion of our roundtable today, any amended versions will be circulated to the respective parties who are at the table and also to our other stakeholders to provide some additional input. So just understand that this is an open and transparent process, that I want to ensure that whatever product comes out of our conversation, it reaches the intent and it reinforces an industry that we know could conceivably grow over the next few years. Yes, Mr. Duenas.
Yeah, Senator, I have to apologize because I didn't quite do my schedule so well, and I have a conflict, so I'm going to be leaving. But if I got the amended version, I'll be glad to give you some further thoughts.
After the conclusion, yes.
Yes,
Then-
okay. And I just, I brought those things up that are on this particular section that I thought were valid.
Okay.
But I really apologize.
Thank you,
I just
Mr.
got kinda
Duenas.
messed up
And
on
like
my
I
schedule.
share with you and the public out there in the community that we will be circulating copies so that in fact we continue this dialogue, because I would hate to see something that's passed that does not accomplish the intent of the original provision and also, work in concert with our business partnerships.
And I fully agree with the concept that we need to protect the consumers on Guam. The consumers in the mainland, sometimes I don't want to compare us. Let's do what's good for the people of Guam. So I agree with Lynn.
Thank you, Mr. Duenas.
Thank you very much.
Okay, folks, moving right along to sub-item 2 is the right that the renewable energy system being offered by the seller or installer meets all of the standards of that particular type of technology, being wind, solar energy, or solar thermal systems adopted by the federal and local jurisdictions, and that all materials being used have the industry standard certification listed as approved products by the Underwriters Laboratory Association. Any questions or comments or concerns? Scott, yes. Please.
I agree that the quality of the product should be there, and I think that some of the like the UL listing and stuff like that you had addressed here is already taken into consideration with the building code and National Electric Code and the standards that GPA sets forth, with their interconnection agreement. It's already, the language is already in there and the requirements are already there. But there could be up to 100 different pieces and parts that go into a solar powered system. Different various screws and bolts and little connectors, fasteners, and things like that. If you're going to require that every piece be UL listed, it would be almost impossible to find some of these pieces and parts, because concrete screws are not UL listed, and so forth, going down to the smallest piece. So I think maybe to amend this section to be a little bit more specific about what pieces and parts be UL listed, or to fall back on local building codes or National Electric codes.
Or what about, Scott, if I can recommend on line 15, that all materials, rather than all materials, that the system being used have the industry standard certification? Because we will be talking about the system that is being sold, the product that is being sold to the consumer, rather than individual parts.
Yeah, So I mean, the system is comprised of 100 different parts, just like a car is comprised of maybe 10,000 different parts. Now, it would be almost impossible to find UL listed pieces, 100 UL listed pieces that made up the whole.
Okay, so that it meets not only UL listed certification, but also local building codes requirements. Is that where you're venturing with your
Well,
statement?
It's saying that all materials need to have industry standard, a underwriter laboratory must be listed as an approved product with UL, but not all materials that go into these solar power systems have a UL listing.
I'm trying to narrow down rather than all materials because it references your 100 different items that is part of the product.
Yeah, so maybe a list of maybe the major pieces be
Panels, the inverters.
those things that
Can we get guidance from some of the industry players? Lynn, any comments? You look.
When it comes to me on this, right, in this room, I'm the smallest solar builder. Our primary focus is conservation. We believe in conserving energy before you produce energy, okay? Our company is very different than a couple others that are sitting here at the table, okay? So we actually build the fewer amounts of systems, okay? But there are a lot of unbelievably wonderful technologies, especially in Germany, okay, that are products far greater than UL US certified, okay? And so to say that that's the only certification that's acceptable, okay, is a little difficult for me to swallow because I deal with a lot of other products that are far superior than that, okay? Now, for a product to get that, okay, it goes through the testing. They were about $100,000 per component, okay, to go get a test. And so what you'll find is a lot of companies, right, will have, I want XYZ component tested, but I don't want the overall, right? And this addresses Scott's, right? So as far as I'm concerned, this is about the consumer, and if you limit what the consumer can purchase, you're also saying, in no other certain terms, you're not smart enough to make this decision. Okay? Now, certain components I would agree with, right? Panels not being one of them, but inverters I probably would, right? Because that's to me, the most important part of the whole process is being able to convert the energy from non-usable to usable for a consumer. Okay? But I don't think limiting it just to one certification. I think maybe we can say 1, 2, or 3 of the very well-known certifications and well-accepted throughout all parts of the world and throughout all parts of the industry, as opposed to say, no, you're only allowed to buy one thing.
There was legal counsel recommendation that this particular verbiage address your concern, is that any products that's sold in the U.S. that is acceptable and meets the Department of Energy standards, that some verbiage be incorporated in here so that in fact it addresses that and it has that minimum threshold. So just FYI, and like I said, the amended version would be reflective of some of those concerns. Yes, Jeff?
No, thank you, Senator. If we go back to the 2004, where Speaker Pangilinan, the NEM law, it states right in here, and it's 85, and this is public law now, 8504, a net metering system used by a customer generator must meet safety and power quality standards established by 1, National Electric Code, 2, Underwriters Laboratory, and 3, the Institute of Electrical and Electronic Engineers.
Okay.
So that's a must meet. So.
Okay, excellent
Okay.
suggestion. Yeah. Okay. Any other comments on sub-item 2? If not, we're moving on to the third sub-item under the Bill of Rights, the right that all material used meets or exceed industry standards for that particular technology. An example would be providing the consumer a certification that a solar energy module is warranted for the 25-year term. All products in the renewable energy industry do have industry standards for production, output, warranties, and installation conditions that the seller or installer shall educate the consumers so they can make an educated decision on what is being purchased and installed. I believe that that particular verbiage is pretty much straightforward. Any questions, comments, or concerns?
As long as they do their shopping.
Yes.
Because, yes, most inverter brands have this warranty period. These panels have this warranty period. But within those warranty periods, there are very different warranties. Okay? And so if they're shopping and the solar company is required to provide the warranty certificate itself, a separate in and of itself document, and I would say that also to both the lease lessors and to the PPA providers, right? Because a lot of this is starting to be focused directly at those that are doing sole purchases. Okay? When you have the PPA providers that are saying, wait a minute, this is our system, we can throw up anything we want, and because we're insuring it, we don't have to disclose this stuff, okay? I think it needs to be required of all types of systems to be able to give that to them. Because there is the fear at some point, right, that a lessor or a purchase provider, power purchase provider, goes out of business, right? And they need to have a tangible document that says, hey, I have a warranty and I can go direct to the manufacturer and get my warranty taken care of, as opposed to just saying, oh, it's all lumped into this PPA, right? This is how we can protect them, as requiring everybody to provide the documents for every type of system.
Okay. Thank you, Lynn. Moving on to sub-item 4, the right to be educated by the seller or installer on installation process to include the following: installing the equipment, assuring the consumer that the product being installed is per manufacturer's recommendation, and that all materials are approved for exterior and interior installation per the Department of Public Works, local codes, and the installation is in strict compliance with the Guam Environmental Protection Agency regulations. Questions or comments?
My only comments regarding this section is an education of the agencies as to the products, and B, if we're getting a building permit to build these things, why isn't there DPW inspections along the way to validate or verify the system is being built to code? Because right now it's left up to us, the industry. Okay? We go down to DPW, right? We put our package in, our engineers designed this, here's our one-line drawing, right? We go out and we install it, right? We call up GPA. Hey, we're done. GPA is not doing a full-blown inspection. DPW is not doing full-blown inspections. They're not checking how we connect it into the main wire. They're not checking our disconnects. They're not checking any of the components that we do. So if, again, this is about consumer protection, right, shouldn't this be the part where we say DPW is required to do building inspections just like they do when they build a house?
Okay. Thank you, Lynn. Yes, Jeff.
Senator, GBA and DPW are doing inspections on our projects. I don't know why DPW is not doing inspections on everybody's projects, but they're doing them on ours. So.
Okay. Thank you, Jeff. Scott?
We rarely, if almost never, see DPW come out to do an inspection on one of the projects. We would have to call to have them to come out if we wanted them to certify inspected, done deal. GPA, again, it's kind of hit and miss. They do or they don't come out and do a final inspection.
Is there a final, like, let's say a certification documentation from the contractor that says this was certified and properly installed based on this signature?
So on my understanding of the power purchase agreement mechanism is that in order to get final payment from the financer, you have to produce those documents that the jurisdiction passed on it. But if you're doing a straight purchase, that's not a requirement because we're buying it.
Or a lease, for that matter. So with Jeff doing mostly PPAs, right?
We're getting full inspection.
He would be calling DPW out and going, inspect it, please inspect it, please inspect it, so my financier will give me my money, right? But for those consumers that are outright buy and lease, it doesn't appear to be happening at all.
But in that particular case, let's say, for example, in Scott's situation where, in fact, they do not regularly inspect the installation of some of these items, then that certification document that is provided to the banking institution, should it be financed by a bank,
Well, a bank would
Would that
require
be-
it. A bank would definitely
Yes.
require it.
but
okay?
but requiring that particular certification document on
It
installation?
just depends. If they went and got a personal loan,
Mhm.
right? They just borrowed 25,000 or
Yeah.
30,000 on a personal loan.
Then the bank won't require
wouldn't require it. If they went and took a loan against their 401k, which I hear a lot of people are doing, as a former banker, don't ever do that. Okay. They're just borrowing cash from themselves, and so there's not a protective device there. Okay. So I think somewhere in there, right? Yeah, it has to happen, right? But in addition to that, we're saying it has to meet or exceed industry standards. That means there's a training process that needs to go on at DPW, and somebody needs to educate and train them on all these different types of systems that are being built out there, because the mountings are all different. All of us use a different mounting system. The majority of us use a different panel. Some of us use the same inverters. Some of us don't. Some use microinverters, some use string inverters, some all kinds of different products that DPW needs to be aware of and check. They can't just say, "Oh, send us your inverter spec sheet showing that it's got UL listing, right? And send us your panel, and if it's UL listed, we'll go ahead and sign off on your plans, and then we'll never do a final inspection." For us, that's what's been happening.
So let me ask you, just a general question posed to everyone here, and Laura Lee, please, you're from Department of Energy, right? Okay. In regards to the consumers requiring DPW inspection, I'm certainly going to have to discuss this with DPW and see what the capacity is or the capability is. But if in fact DPW is required to inspect each and every installation, how would that impact the process?
Senator, if everybody is paying permit fees to have those jobs inspected, right, which is 2.5% of contractual value, that should give them enough money, even if they had, and I don't know the inner workings of DPW, but we're actually paying for that service. That's what that 2.5% is for. So, will it impact their staff? I'm not sure. As far as I know, they have 2 electrical inspectors on staff. One does the north, one does the south. So maybe they would have to add staff, but if everybody in the industry was actually filing for permits, and it should be mandatory to get a DPW and a GPA inspection, then they should have the adequate monies to do that.
Okay. I'm looking at it from the consumer's perspective in terms of understanding the entire process, the requirement for inspections by DPW and Guam EPA, and then how would the consumer react? Let's say, for example, if the timeline is 90 days, 120 days, by the time 60 days passes, they're going to be exhausted and say, hey, maybe this wasn't made for me, in terms of entering into this particular process. So I'm looking at it directly from the consumer perspective. And then obviously allowing the process to proceed so that in fact the consumer's initial concerns are addressed, and they have that right to know and understand that everything is properly installed, that's certified, versus getting a certification document from the contractor that traditionally is required to the banking institution, whether that certification document combined with all the other paperwork that the consumer has, whether that may be sufficient for the consumer. I'm hearing from Lynn that really an inspection is what we should be advocating for.
That's correct.
On behalf of the consumers. Okay?
I think in this case, I think we're all agreed in the fact that for us on the industry, that certification also protects us as well.
Yeah.
Okay? Right? So there's double protection there, both the consumer and for the solar company providers, right? That says, look, we had government officials come out and inspect, and we did this exactly how we were supposed to take care of you. That protects us too. So by protecting them, we're protected as well. So my only concern is staffing and education level.
Well, I think in this
and
particular
cost
case,
changes that may arise because of it.
I think that's a very legitimate concern, but if in fact any piece of legislation is going to require that additional, whether an additional fee is assessed to whoever's purchasing these items so that in fact DPW can literally, and Guam EPA go out and inspect these facilities and give the consumers that assurance that it was properly installed. You know, I think that's an additional benefit that the consumer really should have. So, okay, any other questions or comments on sub-item 5 or 4?
Oh, yes.
Yes, yes,
Senator,
Lorley.
I want to know where this came from, or where, for the Guam EPA, for their regulations, because usually, I don't know if you can ask the 3 companies, do you ever see them? You get a...
Never.
Yeah, because I don't think, they're usually in the beginning when a building is going up, but they're putting
Okay.
the solar systems already in an existing
On the existing
infrastructure.
structures.
So I
Okay.
really don't see Guam EPA's regulations coming in, and I
So
don't
that-
believe...
you don't anticipate that's going to be necessary? Not in,
If it's an
Line 4.
existing structure already, like if it's on the roof, I don't see Guam EPA
what if
in there.
if it's a brand-new home being constructed with an installation of a solar renewable energy product?
Well, that's where
would-
DPW's
Certification.
certification, and then Guam EPA's regulation is within, because before they get the final permit, Guam EPA would have had to review for their regulations already.
Okay.
So it's already a built-in.
Okay, so your recommendation is on page 3, line item number 4, the Guam EPA may not be necessary. Now, let me ask you, if it was retained, that language, verbiage was retained, would it negatively impact the proposal?
No, I don't believe
Because
so.
part of the conversation was DPW inspectors to go out and inspect the facility.
GPA.
And GPA, yes, but
That's-
not
yeah.
Guam EPA.
Well, there is a question that the EPA would come into question on, and that would be at the end of the system's life. How are these things going to be gotten rid of? Okay? Now, when somebody buys it outright, obviously, and it's lived its life cycle, and it's 40 years from now, and it's not doing anything, does that mean all of a sudden we're going to have 10 million panels in the dump? Where are they going? How are they going? And will the EPA determine how they should be gotten rid of? On a power purchase agreement, the power purchase agreement ends at 20 or 25 years or whatever. What happens to the system then? Is it just then turned over to the homeowner at that point and said, hey, this is your problem now, right? We're off the hook. We supplied you power for 25 years, okay? But now that the system's at its weakest point, you got to handle getting rid of it.
Now, would that be something, Lynn, that we would insert as part of the Bill of Rights versus the responsibility of any individual who has a product, whether it's a renewable energy product or something else that would require Guam EPA oversight?
Well, I
Whether-
think if we're going to sit down, because there are panel companies that do recycling,
Uh-huh.
okay? And maybe there is something there, and maybe that, maybe there is a recycle thing, because, I mean, we're all here as renewable energy providers of some kind.
Okay, how about if
we don't want to destroy the island
Right.
25 years from now by a whole bunch of waste.
Lynn, what about if on line item number 3, rather than the installation, we put the disposition?
That would probably work.
The disposition is in strict compliance with Guam Environmental Protection Agency, so that
So that
whatever
anyone that-
disposition requirements exist today, that at least the consumer would be notified, these are your options.
This is what has to happen at the end of the life or
Yes,
something like
yes.
that.
So then what you're saying is because for any, like to build, so the
Right.
contractor would have when they're doing the permit, would have that waste disposable plan, what to do with the...
Would have
the-
that
it's-
information
That's a standard.
provided
It's-
to the
yes.
consumer, that these are your options for disposition of your renewable energy product, period. That's it.
So-
Which is in compliance with Guam EPA requirements.
So then if you're saying for that part, it would be then the seller, the stoller, the company would say about they would have a waste disposable plan.
It would be the consumer notifying.
would have
to
Yeah.
provide that to the consumer.
Yes.
Yes, as,
part of the educational package.
Yes.
Correct.
Yes, okay. Because
Okay.
it shouldn't fall back to the consumer saying they should have this, if we're looking at that, then it would be the one who's going to install the equipment.
okay,
who's
Laura Lee,
going
would
to
you
build
recommend
it.
that we insert it, the latter part of the agreement, or?
Oh, no, if you're going to keep Guam EPA there, then it would be the disposable plan would be stated, I guess, for the seller, installer,
Yeah, or installation and
Yeah.
disposal at the end of life.
that will
Okay.
be stated in their contract.
Okay.
Most PPAs have that in there anyway, for disposable.
Again,
Okay.
it's protection and education, right? It's the
Absolutely.
primary focus.
Absolutely. Okay, moving on to sub-item number 5, the right to a detailed invoice clearly indicating the price of the technology being offered and clear details of parts, warranties, and installation provided by the seller or installer. If this is a lease or a PPA, the seller or installer shall go through the contract and have the consumer fully understand every aspect of the contract before final signature. Pretty straightforward.
I think this is the one that I'm still going to disagree because
Please, Lynn.
you have the if, right? And essentially what we're saying here is the only one that has to provide a price is the true seller. Okay? Under lessors and PPAs, they don't have to disclose it. That's what happens the minute you put that, if this is a lease or a PPA, okay? Now all of a sudden, all they have to do is go through their contract. They don't actually have to disclose price.
I don't read it that way. I think you just have to say, in addition to the above, if it is a lease or a PPA, you have to also do that.
Well, that definitely
That's how
reads
I-
very different if you say in addition to
Yeah.
disclosing price in the first part of the
Okay,
paragraph.
remember our prior conversation, but you're absolutely right. We need to ensure that if there's any potential for conflicting provisions, then we need to clarify it. Because the prior discussion of sub-item 1 was reflective of a full disclosure of the agreement, the terms, the cost, the product, the quality, and the warranties. Now, in this particular case, I understand, any questions or comments with regards to that, in addition to a lease or a PPA?
Yeah, in addition to the
yeah.
above, if this is a leaser, an installer must go through the contract and have the consumer fully understand
Okay,
all aspects of the contract prior to final signature.
absolutely. Okay, so,
I have a comment again on the.
Yes, Scott.
This kind of goes back to my comment on fundamental right number 2, where you're listing clear detail of parts. Again, if we go back down to the smallest detail, if I list on my invoice $1.19 for concrete screws, but the homeowner can find it at Home Depot for 79 cents, now we go back to the table and we scrutinize and all that. It's similar to the auto industry. When
did you want to recommend, because we have previously discussed that in sub-item 2, with some of the critical components of a
yep.
renewable energy
Yep.
product, maybe what we can insert here is being offered in clear details of warranties and installation provided. So the parts would be extracted because we already have previously discussed that, and we'll clarify the language in sub-item 2. Is that okay with you, Scott?
I kind of, actually,
Or-
I kind of like it here, only that it doesn't have to be the detailed price list, right?
Yeah.
The price we're saying is, look, the price of the system is XYZ. The components listed are A, B, C, D, E, F, G, right? This, to me, doesn't read where you have to put, my solar panels are $1.25, and my, inverter is $1,500. That's not how I'm reading this. I'm reading this as full disclosure of price. Here's a list of material components, right? That's kind of how I'm reading that. Is that the intent of what's being said here?
The
Or
intent
is
is
it
full disclosure. Yes.
really to say, my panels are $2.50, my inverter's $1,505, my
It would be
concrete screws are
the
this,
system that is being sold to ensure that the consumer understands some of the cost factors associated with that. And a lot of the conversation took place in sub-item 2. That's why I was looking at that. If it's okay with everyone, and based on Lynn's recommendation, probably what we can do is use the same verbiage that we apply in sub-item 2 to this particular section, so that it's clear and
Yeah, I
it's
think-
consistent. Okay? Sub-item 6, the right that all systems installed are guaranteed to provide the maximum yield committed by the seller or installer on an annual basis. This is called a production guarantee and shall be stated on the contract. If annual production guarantees are not met, then the seller or installer shall be liable to the consumer for the amount of energy the system did not produce. On every system installed, there shall be a true-up energy statement annually, and for any energy shortage on the system, the consumer shall be reimbursed for the incremental variable expense between the utility rate and the contractual rate per kilowatt hour guaranteed. Now I need to hear from y'all. Please, Scott.
My concern, I love a production guarantee, and it definitely protects the consumer. But to force a company or my company, for example, to produce a particular type of warranty, basically an in-house warranty, I think is not fair. Let's say I'll use the air conditioning industry as an example. If you force the air conditioning industry to produce 76 degrees, 24 hours, 7 days a week, 365 days a year, and it didn't for one particular day, and then you force them to pay up to the homeowner, I think it's just.
What about looking at it from the
absolutely
perspective
fair.
of Scott, I'm sorry for interjecting, but the consumer saying you guarantee 100 kilowatts, let's say every single day for the usage of that particular consumer, and then one day out of the year you drop to 95. Yes, there would be that liability, but it would only be reflected on that one-day dip, so to speak, so that there's a minimum threshold that the consumer understands. This is exactly what you're purchasing in terms of the service you're going to be receiving. That's how I read it. So please, after the conversation. Yes, Jeff.
Senator, I think really this is where the rubber meets the road. If we're all in this industry, we've been in this industry for a while, not just myself, but both the Mr. Hagens, Lynn Scott. If you're a good designer of solar energy systems, you should, number one, be a little bit conservative on your numbers. Number two, you should put a threshold that you're going to guarantee that consumer a certain amount of kilowatt hours. If they're going to do a direct purchase, it's $30,000, $40,000, $50,000 they're putting out. It's a lot of money for not having a guarantee. If it's a power purchase agreement, it's a 25-year obligation that they're under. They should have some sort of production guarantee. In most PPAs, not all PPAs, but most PPAs, there is a production guarantee. There is a threshold, and we're usually about, I'd say, 3 to 8% conservative on our numbers, and I'm not saying all the time, but I would say 95% of the time we hit our numbers. And the times that we don't, we actually cut the customers a check. But this bill, the intent of this bill is consumer protection. So this is a protection for the consumer, and it should be in there.
Yeah, I do agree where the rubber meets the road. I am not scared of a production guarantee at all. I know our systems do produce like 5 to 7% above what it's rated. But the issue I have with this is that the government is telling my company to create an in-house warranty, which I think is unfair. That should be left up to the discretion of the individual corporations to design and put together their own workmanship warranties or production guarantees.
But wouldn't this be part of the, Scott, part of the overall agreement? If in fact I'm requiring, let's say, 400 megawatts a day at my home, and you're coming in and selling me a product that says you will get no less than 450 megawatts for the life of our agreement, then that to me is a production guarantee. And if in fact it dips below that, that's where our arrangement comes in, whether in fact there's any liability or any penalty associated with that. I'm just throwing out a scenario where in fact...
I don't agree with
Yeah.
the liability that falls back on the company. There's many things, there's over a dozen things that could happen at the solar power system. My neighbor could have a ton of pigeons and they poo all over the thing every day. I could have a duck farm next door and it blows down feathers all over, and I can't control those things. That's just one of many items that I don't feel comfortable with.
But wouldn't that be part of your original guarantee and agreement? Looking at the environment and say, hey, by the way, in this particular case, looking at your
if they're in a
environment.
bad location, I would have the right to tell my customer, I can't give you a production guarantee.
No, you would get this production guarantee, but if your surrounding, based on your surroundings, contribute to it, then this production guarantee, the way I look at it, the consumer should be provided a production guarantee, but considering the circumstances like you just shared, if that's at the get-go, at the initial purchase, you got to understand, though, you're in a very dusty area, and in this particular case, it could reduce the productivity by 10% by virtue during the course of the summer, during dry seasons. This is where the consumers would understand at the initial purchase of any particular item, this is what I'm getting. And if in fact it rains too much, then this is the production. If in fact it's sunny and if it's dusty, if in fact they have a lot of pigeons out there that could impact the system, you need to understand these are as long as the consumer is properly educated about how the system works and should provide.
I think there's other ways to do that than to enforce some kind of a true-up or a production guarantee. We can use backup weather data, historic data from National Renewable Energy Laboratories. There's online solar power system production calculators that are backed up by other data that we can use to pad our proposal with and show that based on our calculations and our design, this is what it's going to produce. But I don't feel comfortable being held by the government to a warranty. And then who sets
Yeah.
the level of
Well, in and of
rates?
itself.
Well, the
all right.
level will be set by yourself.
Wait, time out.
Yes, Lynn?
That's the whole key here, okay? Is who sets the level, okay? And who validates the level, okay? If this is true consumer protection, okay? Look, we can all rattle off 1,000 different reasons why a system will produce less, okay? We all can. We've all been doing this long enough, and we can forecast the heat index, and we can forecast all the weather stuff and all kinds of stuff, okay? And we're all good enough to be able to put something together. But here's the question. Who's going to validate it, okay? Is it going to be me? Are you going to leave it up to me, the guy who sold them the system, okay, the guy who's selling them the power, to send them a report that says, I don't owe you anything, I did it? Or are you going to have third-party verification? Okay? Where does that line lie? Okay? Because the implications are either A, you trust the guy you bought from, and you let us do whatever we want to do to these customers, or you implement a third-party tracking system, which would be a secondary GPA meter, one on the production side. Okay? So, either you're going to let us control it, or you're going to have a third party control it. Either way, with me, I'm more than happy to give a guarantee. We are good enough, and I agree with Jeff on this, okay? We can be conservative, but what does that do to the customer? Well, okay, that's fine with me. I got to sell you a bigger system so I can meet my guarantee. Well, wait a minute. Are we still protecting the customer? No, you're saying Lynn gets to sell him a bigger system and make more money. Okay? So you got to be real careful when you start pushing this, because we'll do just what Jeff said. We'll be conservative on our numbers, and then we'll make you buy a bigger system. And then, oh, by the way, we get to give you, and just for the record, True Up Energy Statement is a trademark thing. You don't want it in your law. Okay? Right? And then you're going to let me tell you whether or not I did it or not. Well, shoot. I did it every time. Right? Okay, I'm being a little bit facetious here.
Yeah.
Okay? But this is what I'm talking about, okay? I agree with one, but you got to be real careful, because it's not really protecting the customers, okay? It's just forcing us to sell them more than what they really need.
It's either that, or it allows the customers to be able to take a look at, okay, you're selling this to me under this guise or this production guarantee, and guess what? Your neighbor is selling it to me for a higher production guarantee at a much lower rate. You understand? You know what I mean? The
I
nature of
do know
competition
exactly
and
what
being
you
able
mean.
to look at options. Yes, Jeff?
And Senator,
That's what happens now. We'll take a look at the system. Number one, we never overbuild. I think that's number one. It's unfair to the utility. It's unfair to the consumer. Number two, in our PPA, in standard PPAs, there's a equation called a P90 that most contractors follow. That's 90% of the production that the system should produce, and that's a pretty conservative number. Most developers use that number. We use that number. It's called a P90. And number three, that's where I think protecting the consumer, that's where that comes into play. Because if I do a 12 kW system and I actually give a consumer a proposal for that, and I'm guaranteeing 17,250 kilowatt hours on that, and I feel pretty comfortable with that number, and then Mr. Scott comes in at 15,000 and Mr. Hagan comes in at 12,000, then that consumer should feel pretty good about going with me on that PPA.
Yeah.
So I think it's written well. I have no problem with it. I think every contractor that's doing power purchase agreements or actually any installation on this island should be giving consumers a production guarantee. It's just fair. It just is.
And in regards to, Lynn, your concern about who's going to be responsible for providing the report.
It's monitored.
I'm
The
more
consumers,
than happy
yeah,
to-
it's monitored.
I absolutely agree with the production guarantee, absolutely. If you're not gonna do it right, you should be penalized. I just want third-party tracking.
You don't have to have third-party tracking because we put in a monitoring system that the consumer monitors and the investor monitors. So the consumer can get it on it every day. They can do daily printouts. They can do weekly, monthly, yearly. It doesn't matter. So the consumer has that right to monitor it. So do the investors, and that's where that trust relationship comes into play.
But then looking at providing the consumer with information that third-party tracking would be available to you. I mean, it's just making sure that the consumer understands as part of the Bill of Rights, you not only will be provided the tracking system internally by the company that sells you the renewable energy product, but guess what? You also have an option for third-party tracking that would validate whatever information is being provided.
That would be fine. So what you might want to add to number 6 is, and by this, the developer would have to install a revenue grade meter that the consumer can have access to. There you go. That cuts out on the, right.
Okay. And that's also,
Okay.
it also helps GPA too, right?
Tracking, yeah.
Well, yeah, because, there's a lot of disputes, and there's a lot of things that can go wrong with systems, right? Both monitoring systems and inverters as well, right? And we can all go in and program these inverters, right, do what we want them to do, right? Disable their self-protection, right? Because GPA's grid is quite dirty quite a lot of the times. And so in a lot of scenarios, we have to widen their parameters when we program these things just to be able to deal with GPA's dirty power sometimes, okay? So there's a lot of things that can go into play. If we have the meter, the proper meter, it's validated by GPA. GPA says, no, the billing is incorrect. It allows us as companies and the consumer to go into GPA and go, no, here, you got to go in both ways. You got readings both ways, not net.
Right, okay.
So in that regard, I would agree with Jeff's last.
Okay, thank you, folks. And also on that true-up energy statement, thank you, Lynn, for
Yeah, that's a trademark thing.
identifying that as a trademark.
I don't-
Okay, item number 7, the right
Can I
to be
just say
notified.
something,
Yes,
Senator?
yes, Lorelei.
I don't know if this is where it should be, but this is where our office gets all the complaints, where there, I guess, maybe because of the production guarantee, maybe there's a statement there because they whenever time, if GPA's load sheds and the power's out, they have panels on top and they think, why I have no power? And they forget that what they purchase is for the net metering, not to be off the grid.
Correct.
And so, but then they're getting upset and they're calling us up and they're saying that their system's not working because they have no power, but they got solar panels up there. And then we have to try to explain to them, what does your contract say? Does it say that your production guaranteed is when, what exactly is that saying, And so that's where they keep saying, they'll say the company never told us about battery storage that we can invest in. Though I don't want to tell them that's going to cost more than the panels, but just they're not familiar with that, and I don't know if that was the solar companies have mentioned that to them, or given them another option. Maybe some of the ones who can afford it can throw that in and ask, that can be considered, because when
we all try to do battery backup, okay? But there still is the issue with net metering, right? When GPA's down, nothing's feeding anywhere.
Yeah.
Okay? So if we're being held to a production standard, some of it is GPA. They're going to brown out certain areas. That means that solar system that could be producing XYZ, it's prepared and it's willing and it's trying, but it can't go into the grid because the grid's down. Right?
Okay.
So you got some tougher issues that also go along with those.
Okay,
But
yes.
but in that number 6, I mean, I think that's, sorry.
I think that's well written. And then the power purchase agreement, it actually deals with utility outages.
What about
in
what about the
in
battery
PPA.
component? Because that's really Laura Lee's concern.
That's a sales issue, and that's a big misconception in our industry. And we get that a lot. People come in, and that's one of the first things that we we educate our consumers that, look, you understand if power goes out without the battery component, you're not going to have power. It's a big misconception in our industry. And I think, as the industry grows, I think more consumers are educated. I think we'll get over those hurdles. Yeah, but I agree.
Okay.
Big misconception.
Okay, thank you, folks. Moving on to item number 7, the right to be notified by the seller or installer that the materials installed are built to the Guam wind load per DPW. Questions or comments?
I'd just like to see that expanded on a little bit, right? To include both mounting and panel.
Any
Individual specific load ratings by the component, okay? Yes, you can build a mounting system that'll hold a Mack truck in a Typhoon, okay? But if the panel can't stay there or handle the same load, right, it'll snap and come off of that great mounting system you just engineered, okay? So all I'm saying is just a quick update and expand and say, make it both mounting and panel, be specific, a little more specific on it, right? They have to meet DPW's wind load ratings.
Okay. Questions or comments? Yes, Scott.
If you're going to include wind load rating, then you might as well go the distance and include built for Guam seismic zone, which we are on a fault. And then also because the entire island is a coastal zone, products designed or suitable for high salt mist or, whatever the word is for that.
And they do run those tests, and UL does
ISO?
provide.
High salt?
High salt
High
mist?
salt mist, or marine grader, whatever the.
Okay, we'll get the correct verbiage.
Yeah.
Yeah, thank you, Scott. Mr. Lin?
Yeah, we're all on the same page there.
Okay. Okay, item number 8, the right to a guaranteed maintenance, troubleshooting, and insurance program free of charge to the consumer for the life of the contract for lease or PPA financial structures by the seller or installer.
My only comments there, were also provided in my written testimony. This is one of those ones I'm real strong about, right? And anybody who's lived on Guam for any period of time knows that there's plenty of companies that come in, right? But then when the first typhoon hits and they realize I self-insured all of this, they disappear. How many insurance companies have folded over the years after a big typhoon? Okay? Same thing here. Okay? I think there has to be some type of requirement that if they're going to self-insure, they've got to put up a bond, a big bond, or they've got to provide the consumer with an actual policy that says, if we're out of business, this was prepaid in advance for the length of your contract, okay, and you can go claim the insurance on it, right? Again, this just comes down to those certain situations that apply here to Guam, because we get a PACA or we get, Paksong Mall at 226 miles an hour. The wind load rating is at 170 and 190 with the military. 226 is a whole nother ballgame.
Yeah.
Right? And if you got a company that's got 1,000 or 2,000 or 3,000 systems out there, and we pop 220, okay, stuff is going to move around. We all know it. There's going to be a huge bill that company has to pay, okay, if they're allowed to be self-insured.
On that issue on requiring bond insurance, yes. Jeff.
Yeah, I do.
I disagree with that. Our power purchase agreements are backed by Sonova, and that's all institutional money. So you can think of it like mortgaging a house. Your mortgage can be sold on that 25 times, over that 30 years, the mortgage could be sold 5 times. I mean, who knows at the end of the game sometimes who owns it? Not saying that Sonova has spun off any of the assets that they own here on Guam, but if Micronesia Renewable Energy went out of business, Sonova went out of business, this is institutional money who owns these assets. That institutional money, it's bound for that 25-year contractual obligation. They're going to insure that system for 25 years. They're going to get paid back for that asset that they lent the money for, and they're going to maintain that system for 25 years. Whether it's through my company or Pacific Solar or Scott's company, it doesn't matter who, but that system will be maintained, and that owner has to pay that payment every month. So I disagree with putting up a bond. There's no need for it. It's like a mortgage company. I purchased a house down in Petey a year ago. My mortgage was already sold, in that year's time. So and I disagree with putting up a bond.
Well,
Thank you, Jeff.
comparing to a mortgage is really a bad thing, especially when I'm sitting at the table, because I went through the transition of watching institutionalized money through Washington Mutual, $16 billion run on the bank, subsequently taken over by the FDIC, and then sold to Chase. And I also watched how many assets throughout the entire mortgage industry in the United States while I was still there, and companies who couldn't find the asset, didn't know they owned the asset. Nothing was done for months, weeks, years. Here we are still, 8 years later, okay, and they still haven't found some of the assets. So does that mean the guy that just had the solar system ripped off his roof got to wait 8, 10 years until they figure out who bought it and who sold it? No. This is Guam. This is a little different area. When you start talking about institutionalized money, you know that of the 48,000 lending institutions in the United States in 2007, only 6 did business on Guam. Guam is a different beast, okay, especially when it comes to insurance.
Let me do this in regards to that particular recommendation, because we're going to have a hearing at 3 p.m. So we're going to press forward with some of our discussions. I know, Scott, you wanted to add to this. Let me find out. I need to do a little bit more research in terms of what the cost would be for the bond insurance requirement, because we know that in most cases it will be passed on to the consumer, or it may be passed on to the consumer. So certainly that's an issue that we want to ensure that the consumer has perhaps an option too. But I want to make sure that I also do the research on that. So, yes, Scott, you want to add to this section?
Similar to what Lynn was saying, I'm all in for a bond or some kind of maybe local insurance or something, because like Jeff was alluding to, if Micronesia Renewable or Sunova did go out of business, who does the homeowner call?
That would be provided, and I'll give you an instance. Okay, one of the biggest bankruptcies in our industry, which was Sun Edison. NRG just bought other assets, and now NRG is responsible for the Sun Edison assets. So, I still say you can think about it as a mortgage, but our industry is a new industry, but it is institutional money. Bankers have a strong desire to get paid back for the monies that they loan out for an asset. So, if it's not my company, we plan on being around for the next 25 years, but if it's not mine, it might be yours.
But how would the homeowner know what number to call to make a claim?
Well, that would be provided, just like I got a notice in my mail on my mortgage company. Hey,
That's from a
don't pay
company
back
that
at
still
Guam
exists.
anymore. Here, you can pay this company, all right?
Okay.
So, that's why.
Like I said, I need to do a little bit more research in regards to the
Okay.
bond component. Okay.
Quick question.
Yes, Senator Adam.
So how is it that you two are insured? Do you guys have bonds? Or you have an insurance company that's backing you, or?
I don't
So,
do PPAs.
If it's the power purchase agreements that we facilitated, every project has an insurance policy with a local brokerage firm or a local insurance company.
Same with ours.
Okay.
Thank you, Senator Adam. Sub-item number 9, the right to all consumer protection laws and practices, including the 7-day rescission period insured by the seller or installer. After this period, the consumer may be liable for damages, and this should be fully explained to the consumer. That's consistent with the Consumer Protection Act. Yes.
This one here is actually a TILA, upgraded TILA law, Federal Truth in Lending, okay? And your 7-day right of rescission, okay, comes from your final disclosure. So once you've signed your final financing disclosure, you have 7 days to review that and to shop around, and then you can rescind, okay? And so if we're going to use a TILA timetable and disclosure period, we go back to number 1, right? Provide the financial disclosures that are required, of which your right of rescission happens to be one. And the right of rescission doesn't start until such time as both the seller and the potential buyer have signed the form, dated the form, notarized the form, and brought it back to the selling institution. This is a financial agreement, okay? And then the 7 day starts. Not when you hand it to a customer and then you start counting 7 days. Then you go, oh, well, guess what? Now I'm going to start buying stuff because 7 days have passed, and now that consumer's liable for the stuff I bought along the way. That's not how that works.
Okay.
Okay? So really, when you start talking about this one, this is a pure financial disclosure requirement. Go in there and take a look at TILA and the RESPA, R-E-S-P, Real Estate Settlement Procedures Act, which is what it ties directly to. More importantly, as you get further in here, you got to be real careful and look at those RESPA disclosure requirements as well, because you're talking about putting liens on properties, especially on a primary residence, which has the highest disclosure requirements
Yeah.
of anything. And right now, you've got two of them in here that are applying to that very thing. So really do some looking at that.
Okay, thank you, Lynn. Moving on to sub-item number 10, the right to be immediately provided with all documents by the seller or installer necessary to claim any and all tax credits or other incentives applicable, or notified in writing if the customer is required to give up any tax or other incentives associated with the renewable energy system for any lease or PPA agreements. That was
On this
previously
one, we
discussed.
addressed a lot of this in
Yes.
the first one.
Yes, we
right?
did.
Or the now having to disclose price of the system.
Mhm.
That means the consumer would then at least know what that rebate is.
Yes.
Right? You still have the question of ownership and who actually can give their rebate away. If they never owned the system, then they really were never entitled to the rebate. So you got to keep an eye on that, because it is Guam that's paying those rebates. It's not the feds. Okay, but in addition to this, right? This is very difficult clause here to determine who can receive it and who can give it. And all I would ask is you guys do a little more work with Rev and Tax, okay, on that provision.
Okay.
And
Thank you, Lynn.
and that's
Yes, sir.
only some federal money that's coming out of Guam. That's for a direct power purchase here, or somebody if it does a direct purchase and takes advantage of that 30%. Some of the institutional money coming from outside the island, that doesn't affect the Fed money here on Guam.
It's just one you got to research. I would also add to that, you may want to take a look at some of the contracts that are floating around out there and see, is there a difference in the rate charged per kilowatt hour if they don't transfer their tax rebate? They actually keep it. Do they have a higher price per kilowatt hour, or do they get a lower price by putting that 30% into the contract? Because then you also have financial disclosure requirements that would come into play. And then, again, from protecting the consumer side of things, well, if I'm not getting a better rate, why am I giving it to you? If I don't get cheaper power, why am I giving you 30% of the system cost? Why should I have to? You're not giving me anything, right? So, again, I would take a look at that.
Okay. Thank you, Lynn. Sub-item, finally, the last sub-item 11, the right that no lien shall be placed upon a residential dwelling or commercial building as collateral for a renewable energy system, except for fixture, fillings, and mechanic liens.
Mechanically, yeah.
Filings, yeah. Standard?
Standard.
Standard, okay.
Again, from the banking and a primary residence standpoint, I really don't like it, okay? Anytime this house would sell, right, we would have to then go find somebody at the company to subordinate that lien to a new first mortgage.
No, it says no lien.
Except for,
Okay, well, what we do
Okay.
is we put a UCC1. Yeah, a UCC.
UC1, which is just a fixture lien, so we have the right to go on the property and take the equipment off in case they go bankrupt or foreclose. That's it. That's the only intent
from a
of
financing
UCC1.
standpoint, we would require it to be paid or subordinated, okay? So unless there's an automatic subordination clause in those, right, it can and will make it difficult for consumers to refinance, okay, or to sell their properties. It does force those UCC1s to be paid in full, which then is forcing.
It's nothing's paid in full. I don't think you understand a UCC1.
I
We've
do.
dealt with all the banks here on Guam, and we have no problem at all with that UCC1. And this is what people purchasing and building brand new houses.
Just so that our people listening understand the UCC1, the Uniform Commercial Code,
Yeah.
and what's the impact of that provision? Just
I can tell you what it,
Yeah.
what it is, but go ahead.
It's all right, Jeff, but the end result is, is you have a dollar figure attached to the property for this equipment that's sitting there, okay? And as long as that lien is on the property, okay, the equity in that property is securitizing that lien. So it's now forfeit, okay? On a PPA, it's being securitized by not the homeowner. The homeowner doesn't own the system. Okay? It's being securitized by a company that says, it's our system, we're going to maintain it, we're going to insure it, but oh, by the way, we're taking collateral in your house.
That's
Okay?
not true.
That's
not true.
exactly what's happening.
We've been to all the banks here on Guam. It's not true. The UCC1 gives us the right to go on the property, and out of over, I don't know how many systems that we had, but we had to actually focus or actually file or take advantage of the UCC1 on a property that foreclosed. The only right that we have is to go onto that property to take our equipment off of that property. That is it. That's the only right we have under a UCC1. That's in our power purchase agreement, so I don't know what, Bill, what you have or other companies have.
Okay, I'm gonna have to lean on our legal counsel in regards to,
Yeah,
to
sure.
getting some feedback with.
Or the bank, or the
UCC.
banks here, but yeah.
Okay, but I appreciate it. Lynn, Jeff, Laura Lee, Scott, and Bill, thank you very much for your input. We will be amending this particular provision, and it will be forwarded to everyone. Not with it. Thank you very much again for joining us this afternoon.
Thank you.
Thank you, thank you. Hopefully it was helpful.